everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter, Kyle Khan-Mullins. Kyle, thanks so much for joining me.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
Your most recent reporting studies the net worth of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. And there was a story that came out 2 months ago that you highlighted at the beginning of your reporting where she was robbed in D.C. and she was carrying in her purse, which was taken, $3,000 worth of cash. So my first question was, who has that much cash on them? Why does a government employee have that much cash on them? And how much is she worth? And you have the answer actually to that last question. So kick it off. How much is the DHS secretary worth?
Yeah, Brittany, I wish I could tell you why she had $3,000 of cash on her. That's a question we're going to leave to someone else to figure out. But I can tell you, Forbes is now estimating Kristi Noem is worth about $5 million. And so that might give you at least one small answer as to why she had $3,000 in cash on her. She's got the money.
And so before we get into her fortune, take us back to the very beginning because she comes from humble beginnings. She did not come from a political family and she did not begin her career in politics. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, Kristi Noem grew up on a family farm in South Dakota. She writes in her first autobiography she had this huge variety of animals that she kept on the farm, including what she describes as a herd of 20 to 30 cats. As a cat lover myself, I get it. Would love to have more cats. I only have so much space in my apartment. I guess in South Dakota you got a little more room. She got married early, went off to college, and was 8 months pregnant and still in college when her dad died in a farming accident on the family farm. Really, really tragic situation. He was trying to break a crust on top of a grain silo and fell in and died. It was a horrible situation. She dropped out of college in order to keep the farm running. She and her husband worked on that farm for years after that. They also they ran a lodge that was attached to the farm, and then he moved into insurance, and she ended up going into politics.
So then all in all, since we are focused on the money aspect of this, how lucrative of that was that farming business for the Nome family?
So we don't have an exact figure here, but we know that the family farm was a pretty substantial asset for them. It was enough that actually, when her dad died, they were hit by the estate tax. She has talked about that in her congressional testimony. She talked about that as a reason why she looks to repeal the estate tax today. She believes that it hits farmers more than most. Um, and we also know that like I said, her husband left farming in the early 2000s, the Brian Nome, to start a career in insurance. And so, leaving the sector. And today, that farm, that family farm, it's operated by her siblings, and they bought out her share after she went into politics.
And so let's talk about her ascent into politics because she first started in local politics. She served in the South Dakota House of Representatives. What did that paycheck look like, and what did her responsibilities in that job look like?
Well, all politics in South Dakota, I think, are local politics to some extent. It's not a very high population state, and the sense I get from reading her books and from talking to folks there is that there were small, tightly knit communities there. Um, Her job in the South Dakota House of Representatives, it's a part-time job like most state legislatures. So she was continuing to work on the side in addition to working in the legislature. And that only paid about $12,000 a year in 2007. While she was in the state capitol for the first 40-day session, she actually stayed with a friend because she didn't make sense to get an apartment for that amount of time. And that basically sums up the state legislative job. That's how it works in most states, actually.
And so then she ascended to the national stage. She won a seat in Congress. So talk to us about her tenure in the House and the paycheck attached to that job.
Yeah, she won South Dakota's only seat in Congress in 2010. And then, like everyone in Congress, except for congressional leadership, she made $174,000. That salary has not changed since that point, by the way, so it's been losing value every year due to inflation. So that's a pretty big salary for somebody going from $12,000 a year as a South Dakota state representative all the way up to $174,000 as a congresswoman. She seemed to make a pretty big splash early. She was the freshman representative to Republican leadership. This was also in 2010. This was the Tea Party wave. So Republicans went from being in the extreme minority in the House to a very large majority in the House. And she built a reputation for supporting agriculture, for supporting tax cuts. Ultimately, she served 4 terms in the House of Representatives before running for governor of South Dakota in 2018.
Then she won the governor's seat and she actually took a pay cut for that job. As you said, she wasn't making as much as her congressional salary of $174,000. First, how much was she making? And second, were there any perks to that job because she did take that pay cut?
Yeah, so she moved from back to DC, out of DC, back to South Dakota. Her salary dropped to $113,000 as governor that first year in 2019, and we're talking about a lower cost of living situation in South Dakota versus in Washington D.C. having to maintain an expensive apartment in an expensive city, but that was still a pay cut. But that chief executive role did come with some perks. It helped her build her national profile first and foremost. That's always very important for a politician with potential national ambitions. She also started doing extensive travel. She was a big Donald Trump supporter, big MAGA supporter, and so especially after he left office, she became a big surrogate for him. And then was also traveling plenty as governor herself, but not all of her travel was related to just being governor. And a recent Associated Press investigation found that taxpayers in South Dakota covered over $150,000 of travel costs, mostly related to security that was not related to her work as governor.
And so now she has arguably her highest profile job to date. President Trump nominated her to serve as his DHS secretary. She got confirmed. She now serves in that role. Talk to us about her job now and how much she's making as a cabinet official.
This is her highest salary yet. She's back in DC and she's making about $235,000 a year. That is also a salary that's been frozen for several years. I believe it was during the pandemic that executive level salaries in the executive branch were frozen, and so the cabinet hasn't seen a raise in a little while now. But that's again $235,000 a year is her salary these days.
And so, not too bad, but we know that that doesn't make up all this $5 million fortune. So, I want to talk about her other revenue streams. So, let's talk about the books. Because about a year ago, if you remember, she was floated as a potential but serious VP contender. She came out with a memoir, and the biggest headline from that memoir is she shot her family dog Cricket, as well as a goat, the family's goat, in a gravel pit. So, she ended up not being picked as VP, but I am curious. How much did that book make her and any other books that she penned?
So that book was actually her second book. Her first book seemed to flop pretty badly. It came out in 2022, and it sold less than 1,000 copies, according to the data that we got from Circana Bookscan, which is an industry data service. The second one, it came out, like you said, as she was under consideration for vice president on Trump's ticket. It had these very inflammatory anecdotes, very controversial anecdotes about shooting a dog, shooting a goat, and that one sold much better. All press is good press, as some folks say, and she sold over 30,000 copies of that second book. So while we don't know exactly how much she made from her advance or anything, part of that is South Dakota financial disclosure, which is she was governor at the time. The disclosures are just not particularly complete. Not due to her fault. That's just the state disclosures. They're some of the least transparent in the country. We don't know exactly how much she made from it, but we do know that that's a pretty decent selling book. She sold over 30,000 copies.
And you and I have talked before when you cover the net worths of political figures, and you found before that spouses sometimes help boost the fortune of the couple, and that seems to be the case here. Kristi Noem's husband, Brian, you call his business, quote, the key to the Noem's family's finances. How so?
Well, his insurance business is their biggest single asset and their biggest single revenue generator. He started off working in insurance in the early 2000s. At Bryant State Bank. He later bought the insurance agency from the bank and took it independent, operated it himself. Over the past 2 years, we know from Kristi Noem's financial disclosures, he brought in over $1.1 million just for himself between salary and profit over the last, again, that's 2 years, a 2-year figure. Forbes estimates that if he went to sell the agency, he'd probably get a conservative $2 million for it. And part of that is the fact that he is part of what makes the company so valuable. These small town insurance agencies are often built on 1 or 2 really good insurance agents, and the relationships that those agents are able to build. And so, the value he could get for selling the company would probably depend partly on whether or not he stayed on as a broker or as a salesman or not after he sold the company or not.
And so then, aside from the very lucrative insurance company, what other assets do the gnomes have?
It's a bit of an eclectic mix. We've got a car wash that Brian opened a couple years back. That one still doesn't appear to be making money, but we're not based on Gnome's disclosures, but we're not sure yet. We've got their home and land in South Dakota. They've got about 200 acres there. They've got Gnome's two pensions. They're not worth a ton, especially her state pensions, only worth about $70,000. We've got multiple cash and investment accounts. They've been putting money into retirement accounts over the years. We've got some livestock and farming equipment that they keep on their home and land there. And they have a loan to their 28-year-old daughter's yoga studio. And she operates a yoga studio in South Dakota. They gave her a loan. That's declared as an asset on Kristi Noem's financial disclosure.
Kyle, per usual, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for the reporting.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks again.